I want to ask the Taoiseach if he and his government will make a clear statement of condemnation about the systematic human rights abuses in Bahrain. Over 5,000 people are currently imprisoned on political charges, where many are subjected to torture, including sexual abuse. I want to give a few examples. Nabil Rajab was incarcerated for posting so-called false tweets criticising Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen and the torture in Bahrain's Jau prison. Hajar Mansour, who was incredibly imprisoned based on the activities, the human rights activities of her son-in-law, and was spat on, verbally abused and subject to psychological torture as part of her arrest. There's a so-called Bahrain 13 human rights activists, including a doctor who suffers from paralysis and who was forced to stand on one leg while he signed his supposed confession. A consistent pattern of mass trials where the very idea of justice is a joke. Over 500 people convicted in a process of 5 mass trials in the past 2 years. No freedom of expression, where you can be convicted of promoting terrorism simply for liking a tweet that is critical of the government or the ruling family. And so I just want to ask whether the government will be speaking clearly out against this in the context of the trade mission that the Minister for Trade went on in November, and which is a major trade mission to the Middle East, including Bahrain. And when asked by Deputy Crowe about had they raised concerns about human rights, Minister Coveney said it was not possible to raise our concerns about the human rights situation directly on this occasion. And it begs a very serious question about whether human rights is being put in very much second place to trade and profits.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach, to reply.
Thank you, Oireachtas. Just in relation to the European Green Deal, I'm very supportive of it and very encouraged that President von der Leyen and the new Commission have decided to take a lead on this. When she was nominated by the European Council as Commission President, she said she would do so, and I think she's already really showing her sincerity in that regard. The objective is, of course, to transform Europe into the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. And the approach and the way she's framed it and the Commission has framed it, I think, is a very good one. Less in the vein of a climate apocalypse, but more in terms of the opportunities that can be gained for the European Union in being leaders in climate action, whether it's creating new jobs, new businesses, green growth, new technology, innovation, all of those things, new wealth in particular. But I do think it's really just an initial document, and now needs to be built on and funded too. And I think the EIB in particular has a role here, and indicates that the EIB may be able to lend up to €1 trillion towards climate action projects in the decades ahead. They, of course, have to be commercially viable ones, though, so that the money can be returned to the EIB. In terms of the Mercosur political agreement, I think it's worth pointing out that the political agreement on Mercosur has an environmental clause which requires that Latin American countries honour their commitments when it comes to climate change. If they don't, the deal is off. And I think that's significant because previous trade deals don't include environmental clauses of that nature and may become a model for the future in that regard. On Israel and Palestine, I'm strongly supportive of the Palestinian statehood, and we're strong advocates of the welfare of Palestinians, and we do that in international forums, whether it's the UN or the EU or in bilateral meetings, and will continue to do so. That's well recognised by the Palestinian Authority and also by other Arab countries. When it comes to products made in the settlements, we intervened to support the labelling case, which now ensures that products that are made in the settlements are labelled as thus allowing people and businesses to boycott them. However, an outright ban on imports, in our view, would be contrary to European law, as trade is the sole competency of the European Union. We, of course, absolutely condemn any human rights abuses in Bahrain or any other country where they occur. In terms of the WTO, international trade requires agreed rules for countries to trade with each other under a common set of principles, and WTO is at the core of that system. For it to function properly, it must have a mechanism to resolve disputes. And that's why it's very regrettable that the United States decided to block the appointment of new judges to the appellate body, because without them it cannot function. At last week's European Council, we expressed support for the European Commission's effort to set up an alternative arbitration panel interim arrangements with third countries other than the US while actively pursuing a permanent solution. So essentially a workaround except for disputes that involve the US. And we're committed to finding an agreed solution to end the impasse.
Thank you, Taoiseach. That concludes